Hey guys, Political Junkie 2414 here, and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be unveiling my initial prediction for the 2025 gubernatorial elections. We have two up this year in Virginia and New Jersey. Both of these are going to be pretty indicative of, or going to give us good signs of how the American public is feeling going into, after 1 year of the second Trump administration. Both of these governorships, especially Virginia, are highly indicative of the national environment. And in Virginia in particular, in the last 50 or so years, only on one occasion has the state voted for the party, for a gubernatorial candidate from the party that currently controlled the or that at that time controlled the White House. So it is very prone to bucking the national trend, and that bodes well for Democrats, on the surface, but is a little bit more complicated. So we're going to talk about both of these races. We're going to start with Virginia. In Virginia, we have a pretty, this is the marquee race really of 2025. New Jersey as well. New Jersey is a pretty important race too, but Virginia, as I said, historically votes against the incumbent party in the White House. And so we have a matchup here between Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earl Sears and former Democratic Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger. So this is pretty interesting. This is a pretty interesting race because either candidate is going to be, regardless of which party wins, Virginia is going to have its first female governor in the state's history. But to talk a little bit more about the state, about the candidates as a whole, Winsome Earl Sears, she won her lieutenant governor's election in 2021, alongside Glenn Youngkin, who is currently term limited out. Virginia's constitution does not allow the state's governors to run for consecutive terms. You can run for non-consecutive terms, however. And Earl Sears has been running kind of a disconnected campaign from the rest of the Republican ticket in Virginia. She has not had that many rallies with John Reed, the nominee for her lieutenant governor position. She has not really coordinated as much with Jason Miyares, who was elected Attorney General in 2021, is now running for re-election. Whereas Spanberger and the Democrats, while the Democratic primary for the lieutenant governor was pretty nasty and divided, they have all gotten behind. They have all been, cross endorsing. They have been working together, showing a united front, I guess is the right way to put it. But talking a little bit about Virginia as a whole, what we can expect to see. This is a state that was historically Republican for a long time. But in 2008 flipped to Barack Obama, and it has been blue ever since. It was kind of a swing state during the Obama years, but in more recent years, Joe Biden won the state in 2020 by a whopping 10 points, which was the largest Democratic margin for a presidential candidate in Virginia since FDR in 1944. So it was even better than Lyndon Johnson in 1964 when he swept, the nation. Everything but the South. Virginia was still to the right of its 2020 results, which is pretty crazy to think about. But talking more about 2024, which is more relevant, Kamala Harris, as we know, didn't do as well, underperformed Joe Biden in basically every state. She did hold on to Virginia by about 6 points, actually doing a little bit better. Actually, no, she did like a 0.1% better in New Jersey, which is still not, great given New Jersey's track record, but we'll get to that in a little bit. She did this mostly by holding on to the Virginia the Northern Virginia suburbs, getting getting enough African American voters to turn out in Richmond, and keeping most of Hampton Roads blue, which is an area that long benefited Republicans. Some parts of it are trending right though, because it's a very some parts of it, like Suffolk County, I believe, have gotten a lot bluer. Or actually, they have gotten a little bit. I was gonna say they got a little bit redder, but they actually have gotten bluer. But some of these other counties, like Southampton, this used to be a very competitive county. John McCain only won it by like 2 points in 2008, but Trump won it by 25 last year. And some of these counties, these historically black counties in the southeastern part of the state, they have trended towards the Republican Party. Surrey County, I believe, is one of those. But she was able to maintain her, she was able to maintain enough support where she could win, and she actually received, she actually did better than Hillary Clinton's margin in 2016, which actually saw, it saw a pretty similar result, all things considered, but you would think that, given that Hillary Clinton did not, did better in most of these states than Kamala Harris did, that she would have underperformed in Virginia, but the exact opposite happened. And so I think that personally, Democrats historically, history suggests they have an edge here. Spanberger comes from a very competitive district that was Republican for like 5 decades in the central part of the state. Is currently represented by Eugene Vinman, who won last year. Spanberger decided to retire from Congress in 2024 so she could focus on this gubernatorial run. So, yeah, I think I've said everything that I really need to say. Going into my prediction, I find it a little bit hard to judge Republicans as the odds-on favorites now. And to be fair, I thought the same was true in 2021, and Glenn Youngkin won. But as I said, history favors Democrats, and Spanberger is a tried and tested candidate with a more solid electoral history than Terry McAuliffe. Spanberger did, and this is not to say Democrats did awful in 2022 because they didn't, but she survived Republicans picked up one seat in Virginia that had voted for Joe Biden in 2020 in the last midterm cycle. Spanberger was able to defeat Yesli Vega despite a lot of money being raised nationally. This was one of the biggest races. Republicans were really looking to unseat her here. And while this district was drawn to be bluer than its previous counterpart, Spanberger still did pretty well. Honestly, she outperformed my expectations. I mean, I still had her winning, but I thought it was going to be a little bit closer. And so you see her, whereas Terry McAuliffe, if you look at his election, which is the only one in the last 50 years where the incumbent party in the White House has held the Virginia governorship. If you look at this election, McAuliffe did not necessarily... He actually received a higher percentage of the vote in 2021, where he got 48%. But Ken Cuccinelli was really inhibited, I think, by the Libertarian candidate. I'm not necessarily saying that McAuliffe would have done awfully. I mean, this is still much better than the blowout that Democrats received after Obama's first election in 2009. But otherwise, if you take away this Libertarian candidate, and odds are most of the votes would have probably gone to Republicans, some to Democrats, some just wouldn't have voted at all. But I think you would have seen Ken Cuccinelli be the governor of Virginia in that scenario. Whereas Spanberger has won outright majorities in her elections, and there's been a lot of talk recently too about some of this polling, and Roanoke College, which previously projected in May that Spanberger was leading Earl Sears by 17 points, which was never going to happen. But a lot of voters were undecided then, and less are now, but still 15%. And now in August, in the most recent poll, Spanberger's only leading by 7. Which is a little bit worrying for Democrats. They need to make sure that they keep their numbers up here, because Terry McAuliffe's numbers looked pretty similar to this during the summer of 2021, and then they crashed in the last couple of weeks. But overall, I think Winsome Earl Sears is not running the same campaign that Glenn Youngkin was, and I think Spanberger has presented a united front. She has bipartisan appeal. She has a history of outperforming. I guess she didn't really outperform Joe Biden all that much in 2020. It was pretty much the same. But she was able to win a historically Republican district. Yes, it was a Democratic wave, but she held on to it in 2020, which was a pretty big deal when Republicans in the House elections were generally outperforming Donald Trump. And I think that she's going to be the next governor of Virginia. It'll be very interesting to see who wins this race. So keep your eye on that this November. But going over to New Jersey, you might be wondering, why is New Jersey, why haven't I talked about New Jersey yet? You would think Virginia would be more competitive. And, historically, New Jersey's been a very, very Democratic state. It has not voted for a Republican candidate since George H.W. Bush in 1988 when he defeated Michael Dukakis in a blowout election. And it has stayed pretty blue. I mean, the closest in 2004 was a little bit shaky for John Kerry, but ever since then, it has voted for Democrats by double digits until 2024. I think what happened in 2024 was a combination of factors. I think some of it was the fact there were warning signs of this in the 2021 election. If you look at that election, this race was a lot closer than a lot of people expected. There was a point where Jack Ciattarelli, who's running again, I mean, you saw the 2025 page, he really outperformed expectations, outperformed all polling. This was expected to be a likely Democratic race for Phil Murphy. He had won by 14 percentage points just 4 years prior. And there was a point on election night when Ciattarelli was leading Phil Murphy in the state. Now, it was I think it was called a couple of days after the vote, or after the election, or after Election Day. But Murphy won by the skin of his teeth. And historically, it is unusual, if you look down here, as the fine people of Wikipedia have said, Murphy did kind of buck the trend of New Jersey voting for the party out of power in their, for governor. But still, this was an underperformance. Biden had won the state by 16 points just a couple years prior, or just 1 year prior. Same deal as Virginia. This went from a 10-point victory for Joe Biden to a 2-point victory for Glenn Youngkin. And then you see in 2024, Kamala Harris basically collapsed in the district. You saw you saw counties. If you look at some of these, like Bergen County, this voted for Biden by 16, voted for Harris by 3. You look at Passaic County, this went from a Biden plus 17 seat to a Trump plus 3 county. And, the list goes on. And so I think what Democrats really have going for them in this race, they have a very strong candidate. Mikey Sherrill has won a historically Republican seat in a much similar vein to Spanberger in Virginia. She won a historically Republican seat in 2018. She has outperformed Democrats nationwide, and her district has gotten bluer. It got bluer in redistricting, but she has consistently, this was a seat that voted Republican. Voted for the incumbent Republican by 20 points, and it voted for Mikey Sherrill by 15 points just 2 years later. And so she has maintained a pretty strong grip on it. And I think that she is pretty much the best candidate electability-wise for the Democrats. Now, that doesn't mean that this race isn't going to be close, because Ciattarelli has a lot of experience. He's run for governor twice. He was the nominee once. He was able to he didn't clear the field for the Republican primary, but he basically, he was the clear front runner, whereas Cheryl kind of had to fight for a little bit, although she did still win, pretty comfortably. And so you look at polling here, it's a little bit more complicated. I mean, it looks very similar to Virginia, but it is, on average, a little bit closer than, Cheryl's leads are a little bit slimmer than Spanberger's in Virginia. And I think some of that comes down to the fact that Democratic turnout, Democrats are not, despite Trump being in office, Democrats are not as enthused to come out. I think there's a serious morale problem in the party right now. I don't think that necessarily means that Democrats have a huge turnout problem right now, but they have a voter registration problem. They have an enthusiasm problem. I think that Trump has often solved that for them. I think that he will, to a degree, negate the effects. Keep the effects from, or keep the Democrats from basically crashing. But he's a good organizing tool, I guess. But Mikey Sherrill really should be looking at stronger numbers here. Now, I would not be surprised if we got to November and she won by like 10 or something crazy like that, because she has a very strong track record. But New Jersey's also been shifting to the right, and there's still a lot of undecided voters here. One thing to note is Ciattarelli's own internal polls have been showing him down, but that could very well change. And again, Democrats did not see, and the polls did not indicate Democrats were in any danger in 2021, and look how that turned out. And I think so I think Cheryl's in a good position. It's going to be interesting to see. I have a little bit less. I don't know as much about the geography, the political geography of New Jersey as I do Virginia, but I do think that she's a good candidate for the suburbs, which were stayed pretty. They didn't really shift that far to the right from from Biden to Harris in 2024. They weren't necessarily better for her in a lot of circumstances, but the main issue was Democratic turnout and white working, and the party's performance with white working class voters and Hispanic voters. So right now, I'm going to give New Jersey to Mikey Sherrill by a lean margin. I could see it going up to likely. I could also see it getting a little bit closer. But right now, that is my prediction. I think she'd win by around, maybe 3 points. I'd say it's a pretty similar margin to Phil Murphy's 2021 margin. And then in Virginia, I would say Spanberger wins by, I think 7's a pretty, normal amount. I could see it being 8 or 9. I think she is going to do a little bit better than Kamala Harris did, but I don't think she's going to get a Tim Kaine 2018 result. That would be crazy. So what does that look like on the National Governors Association map right here? And what do I mean by that? I mean basically, out of all the 50 governors in America, we've got I'm going to fill in these 2 seats. Right now, Republicans hold 27 out of the 50 governorships. Democrats hold 23. If my prediction ends up being correct, they will hold 24 after this election. So thank you guys all so much for watching this video. A little bit shorter than usual, but there's only 2 races really to cover here. Let me know who you think is going to win these races. Like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, share the video with someone who you think would enjoy it. Let me know your opinion on who you think is going to win in these races. I would love to hear all of your opinions, and I'll see you guys next time when I talk about all things politics. See ya.